This wine is our 2019 Tectonic. This is a skin fermented or orange wine. It's a really old style of wine, thousands of years. And so just in the last maybe decade or so, it's a wine that's kind of had a bit of a resurgence, which is great. And it's one of the reasons why we started making it, because it's just it's a super nice expression of some of the white varieties that we work with. So again, this one is made from La Crescent, which is one of our cold hardy hybrid varieties that we grow on a couple sites here in Shelburne, in Charlotte, and then further down in New Haven. And you can see, it's called an orange wine, because of that just great color that you see on there. Just really nice, deep orange. And La Crescent, in the vineyard when it's getting ripe, it takes on this really amber hue and has nice, long, loose clusters, which is great from a disease perspective. So it gets a lot of air and sunlight on the berries, and they just turn this beautiful amber kind of golden color. One of the things with orange wines and skin fermented whites, they have, I just mentioned the phenolic component. So a white wine is typically made by bringing the grapes in from the field and pressing directly and separating the juice from the skins, whereas an orange wine is made more commonly, or like as you would a red wine. So the skins actually are in the presence of the juice throughout the fermentation, and ours goes for an extended period of time, up to 12 weeks, and that's where you pull out a lot of that color, but you also pull out some of the tannin, which is, again, you would typically notice in a red wine, but so it has some of that phenolic structure and texture. And so there's a little bit of bitterness, a little bit of that drying effect on the tongue. So this wine is made with about 14% whole cluster as well. So that's, stems, skins, all that, about 14%. Again, a long maceration. And then it's pressed off and it goes into barrel. It's aged in neutral oak. You get some nice, very slow oxidation through the wood. And then, like all the other Iapetus wines, they're not filtered. So you might see, you can't really see, it got a little, the wines are not crystal clear. They have a little bit of cloudiness to them. If you hold it up to the light, there's a little bit of opaqueness. And that's just, we just don't feel these wines necessarily need to be filtered, so we choose not to. It's got a lot of complexity, a lot of subtleties. It's just a really beautiful wine. It's citrusy, there's a lot of tangerine, like orange peel, grapefruit pith. One of the nice things too about our cold hardy varieties is the acid the acidity of the wines make them really great for food pairings. But also in terms of the orange wine style, it balances really nicely with the tannic component. So it leaves your palate, kind of constantly refreshed, and it doesn't get tired. But just an absolutely lovely wine. A little bit of white tea, or white pepper, sorry, a little bit of like black tea. We like to serve this wine with a little bit of a chill, just a very, very slight chill, but it's actually kind of fun to sometimes, if you have a few bottles that you picked up, try one, or you can just do it with one bottle that you chill, in the fridge for, I don't know, half an hour or so. Let it drop down in temperature a little bit, and then taste it then, and then let the bottle warm up to ambient temperature, and try it again. Or have a bottle that you chilled and one that you didn't chill, and taste them side by side, which is also a great way to do it. And you really get a completely different aromatic experience. So the profile of the wines kind of evolves with the temperature, and that's a lot of fun to experience and to taste through. These wines are very food friendly. The acidity of the wines kind of carries them through a meal, makes them very versatile. But this wine is great just with a kind of a classic charcuterie board. It's really good with like pistachios, some dried fruit. You get kind of some apricot notes in the wine, so that's kind of fun to have on the plate. But then also for a meal, some Thai food, nothing too spicy. I don't know if it could hold up to something super spicy, but mild Thai food. I think it would go great with like pierogies. More generally speaking, fish would be a nice pairing. But I think you could also do like, a duck breast with like an apricot glaze. That could be really nice with this wine. It's got a lot of versatility. I think I would encourage people to just, explore their palates and what they really like to cook and take it from there.
This is our 2019 Celestial Louise. This is a blend of 3 different cold hardy hybrids that we grow here. The first being Louise Swinson, second La Crescent, third a new variety called Itasca. This is a really fun, bubbly wine. It's great for celebrations. It can be paired with cheese, good with fried foods, mimosas. It can be drunk alone. So this is a really nice wine to kind of break down some of the differences between our Shelburne Vineyard core line and the Iapetus wines, where Iapetus is taken in a little more minimalist approach where we're not fining, we're not filtering, nothing like that. Some of our Shelburne wines are actually filtered, and this wine goes a step farther and is actually force carbonated by our friends down at Artisano Meadery. We like to not really box ourselves in stylistically, so we can kind of play around with some newer techniques while also sticking to the tried and true ancient winemaking techniques. La Crescent and Itasca are 2 varieties from the University of Minnesota. Both are rather vigorous and can be a little more challenging in the vineyard, but they add a fruitiness and a tropical punch to this a rather neutral grape. So this wine, I get a lot of stone fruit, a little brioche. The slight effervescence gives it a nice little prickle, little CO2 acid on the tongue. Again, just goes really nice to cut any oily, heavy, fatty foods, so you can pair it with a lot of different things.
I'm going to talk to you today about Figure 3. Figure 3 is in our Pet Nat series. So this is a Petulant Naturel. It's a sparkling wine made in a traditional method. This wine takes quite a bit of work to produce. There's a number of different steps that are associated with making a Pet Nat. After bottling, these bottles get stored on their sides. This gives the wine optimal lees contact in hopes that the wine finishes fermentation inside of the bottle. After we believe that the wine has finished fermentation, producing enough CO2 inside of the bottle to make the wine sparkling, they will get then riddled. Riddled is the process of stirring all the lees in the bottle and letting all those lees settle then upside down in the neck of the bottle. After that goes through maybe 6 or 7 days of settling, then we will do a process called disgorging. Disgorging is basically the process of removing the settled lees from the bottle. That bottle then gets topped up with more of the same wine, or some processes involve topping that up with a still wine. Depends on what your final result is going to be. And then the bottle gets recapped, and that's when you achieve a finished product. Figure 3 is technically a rosé, although it still picks up a lot of pigmentation. That's just due to the nature of Marquette. This wine is full of a lot of raspberry, a lot of really light rosé-esque tasting notes associated with it. So you could probably pair with like a pool, maybe a couple floaties. Would also go good at a barbecue too, even maybe some smoked meat. Really great effervescence on this. The bubbles aren't too strong. Come through just in the right amount that you would expect from a Pet Nat.
All right, so I'm going to talk about our 2018 Marquette. This is one of our kind of classic big red wines that we've been making for basically the whole time Shelburne Vineyard has existed. So the grape Marquette is an excellent red grape, one of the first that was planted here. It was developed out in Minnesota, at the University of Minnesota. So as you would imagine, it is extremely cold hardy. We basically don't have much of a problem with cold on Marquette vines unless it gets down to like below -30, 35, which is quite rare. It's very vigorous, which kind of comes from its genealogy as being a hybrid with the wild vines that grow around here. So one thing that ends up showing itself in the wine a lot of the time with Marquette is that these grapes tend to hang on to their acidity for a long time when we want to be picking them. So we tend to leave them on the vine for quite a while, usually to like the end of September, to let that acid go down. But in doing that, we also let sugar get pretty high, so you end up with a big wine, 15% alcohol a lot of the time. In terms of making a red wine, it's a bit more of an involved process than making a rosé or a white wine. You basically crush the fruit, or you leave some of it kind of uncrushed, whole cluster, and you put it all into a tank with the skins and the stems sometimes, and kind of the seeds and everything, all the solid stuff from the fruit. And you do punch downs on that tank to keep everything kind of in suspension and moving around. During that time, you get really good extraction of color and tannin and a lot of the flavors that you would miss out on if you were to press fruit immediately. Then we give it kind of a certain amount of time with that skin and all those solids. And we're still kind of playing with what is the correct or ideal length of maceration time, is what that's called. This wine, I was just looking at our notes, it seems like we left it on the skins for kind of a shorter amount of time, like a couple of weeks only. Sometimes with the Iapetus subduction, which is our other Marquette red, we've left that for over 80 days, closer to 100 days, a couple of vintages. So we're still kind of experimenting with that. So after it is pressed, it goes into oak barrels. We use a wide range of age in our oak barrels. The newer barrels kind of give you more of a sharp oak influence. The older ones just kind of help with the oxygenation and just kind of the smoothing out the more angular parts of the wine without that more direct oak influence. So we kind of like to have a range of ages of barrels that we put each wine into. And while it's in that barrel, we will stir the lees up from the bottom of each of those barrels about once a week for a few months, just to keep the interest going and stuff moving around in there. And then after about 8 months in the barrel, it all goes back into a tank together, and then we'll bottle it sometime in the summer. But in terms of specific things, this kind of smells like a lot of like ripe berries and cherries and basically fruits that have that color. That's what this brings into my mind usually when I smell it. And then you get subtle, little bits of vanilla and baking spice and stuff that the oak can bring. We generally try to not have like oak as a smell jump out at you from our wines by using, like I said, a mix of aged barrels. And I think we pulled that off with this one pretty well. Yeah, it just tastes like cherries and plums and, but it has that deep tannic red thing that lingering finish that I really like in a red wine. In terms of pairing, the thing that I most want to eat when I drink this wine is like a big bowl of pasta with like some meat sauce and a bunch of Parmesan cheese. I think that is what this brings to my mind.